Alright guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this, a Glock 34 Gen 4 practical tactical chambered in 9mm. Now eagle-eyed viewers of the channel will remember that this gun has been previously reviewed here on the channel. This was actually the fourth video that I ever put up. However, that video here recently has been getting a lot of interest. It has had an increase in views, as well as likes and comments and all that kind of stuff. And actually, at one point, this was my most highly rated video. Of course, that's tapered off over the years, but it has had a sudden uptick in interaction, and somebody requested that I do a revisit on this particular handgun, and that's what we're doing here today. Now, those of you who have seen my previous revisit videos know that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on history nor features and stuff like that, as much as we are going to spend a lot of time on perhaps some more of my personal history with the firearm, some things that have come out of the comments section, as well as discuss more of the shooting dynamic in this particular video. So if you want like a deeper discussion on like features and stuff like that, you should check out the previous video, link in the description. Now, in addition to that, we're going to bring in some of the aspects that I talk about in current reviews. With that being the fourth video that I put out on the channel, I was still kind of finding like my groove and my rhythm and all that kind of stuff, and I've refined my product since then, and I'm going to kind of bring this video to get those thoughts and aspects of the Glock 34 more online with the current pattern of my videos. All right, so with that, something that I mentioned in the previous video was that I am like an OG Glock fanboy. I've loved Glocks ever since I was a kid, and they are a go-to option for me. I think it's important to note that I am not Glock myopic. I actually train and shoot and defend myself, or at least carry a lot of different firearms manufacturers, and we've seen that on the channel over the years. I've reviewed a lot of different guns, and I've reviewed guns out of other people's collections that I have praised very highly. So as much as Glocks are a go-to option for me, it is never my goal to make my preference your problem. So yes, I will always recommend Glocks, and I will continue to train with, carry, compete, all that kind of stuff with Glock pistols. However, I have long held that in the striker-fired polymer frame market, you really can't go wrong. There might be guns that I don't necessarily like, but that's just my opinion, man. Like, take from that what you will. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind here. Like, yes, I like Glocks, and if I had to pare down my entire collection to just one gun, there's a high probability that it would be a Glock. But I'm not currently in that condition, so I have a bunch of different guns. All right, now a little bit more about my personal history with the firearm. I have always liked the long slide Glocks ever since Man on Fire with Denzel Washington. I mentioned that in the previous video as well. Great movie. If you haven't seen it, you need to like fix your life and watch it right now. Pause this video, go watch that movie, come back afterwards. And I knew that I wanted a long slide Glock. I just wasn't sure which one I was going to wind up coming across on a deal. When I first came back from living abroad, got back stateside and all that kind of stuff, I was waiting for to be able to be reunited with my guns. That took a couple of weeks. I got off work early one day and decided, you know what, I just really need to shoot. I haven't shot in a while. You know, my guns aren't here yet. I'm going to go rent something to shoot. I went to a local gun shop that had a range attached to it, and I wound up renting a Glock 34 and bought a box of 9mm, ran that box through this gun, well, through that gun, super fast, and then I was hooked. Like, I'd never really shot any of the long slide Glocks at that point, and knew that I definitely needed one of these in the collection. Now, that doesn't mean that I immediately turned around and bought a Glock 34. It'd be a little while before I actually got around to buying one of these. I actually almost bought a Gen 5 MOS with the front cocking serrations before front cocking serrations became standard on the Gen 5s. I had the paperwork done up and everything. I was just waiting for the background check to be complete, and that was when a PSL 54C came walking into the gun shop. And if you haven't seen it already, you should watch the PSL 54C video to see how that story ends. Link will be in the description. Later on, I would wind up buying this particular handgun, and this has been a staple of my collection ever since. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers the kind of like personal history aspect of this particular firearm, why don't we go ahead and get into a discussion of features. And right off the bat, guys, we've it kind of caught me lacking a little bit here. As we can see, I still have the original stock sights on this handgun. And that was something that I made kind of a big deal of in the first video. A couple opinions that still stand. Stock, plastic, Glock sights will still get you to the range. However, you should still upgrade your stock sights. Murph, why are you still running these stock sights? Well, so it's a little complicated. I have a very large firearms collection, and it has only gotten bigger since I bought this gun. It has continued to grow in the years since I bought this gun. And one of the issues when you have a large collection of pretty much anything is maintaining that collection. So I only make so much money, and it's still expected that I'm going to buy like food and, pay bills and stuff like that. So then whatever money's left over has to be figured out how it's going to go between any number of other interests, though my main interest is firearms. But I also have to get like clothing from time to time because, underwear wears out. And this is a reminder to some of you that you need to go through your underwear drawer and clean out your underwear. Anyway, so with that being the case, I have to break up the remaining money that's available between like maintaining firearms, getting guns fixed from time to time, updating stuff on guns, as well as ammunition, because these things are pretty much useless without bullets, and they're hungry. These are hungry, hungry boys, and I shoot every weekend. So with that being the case, I've had to make some refinements in how it is that I manage my firearms collection. In the time since I bought this firearm, whenever I buy a gun, there are obligatory things that have to happen right off the bat. With handguns, I have a whole checklist of things that have to be done. So let's say, like, I bought a FN57 right now, which previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. Actually, funny story with that, that gun, I was strongly hinting to the owner that I wanted to buy it. The owner was strongly hinting to me that he was willing to sell it, but neither one of us just came out and said it. So let's say that I contacted him right now and was like, hey, I want to buy that. And he and I did the exchange and all that kind of stuff. I gave him money, he gave me gun. The things that I would immediately, the obligatory actions that would occur after that is holster, right off the bat. Doesn't matter what kind of holster, I just need to pick one and commit. And then I would swap out the night sights. I would also have to make a determination whether or not I'm going to put a light on the gun. And then I would have to make sure that I would have 3 magazines. All of those are actions that have to occur whenever it is that I buy a handgun now. When it comes to a rifle, it's a little bit different. Depends on the type of rifle, blah, 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 blah. Regardless, once those things are satisfied, that gun is ready to go for the moment. I can set it aside, shoot it for a little while, decide what type of advancements that I wanted to add to it later as I go through my rotation of guns that need updates or anything along those lines. It's like a full-time curator type deal to be able to manage a large firearms collection. So this gun, because it predates that, has not had these updates done. Glocks that I have bought since this gun, since I made that managerial change, or that since I started leaning further into like how it is that I curate my firearms, Glocks that I've bought since then have had their sights updated. So this thing is just waiting to come up in rotation. It's not been important enough to me because these sights do still get me to the range, and I really haven't taken this to any courses since the first pistol course that I took it to. Like I haven't really honestly been shooting this gun this much over the years. I have competed with it since then. I have shot it on occasion, but the other thing that we run into here is that running a YouTube channel, when it comes to my free time, is actually pretty taxing. Like pretty much everything that I do at the range has to be bent towards generating content for the channel, but also still be beneficial for me for training. So I still attend courses and stuff like that. I haven't in a while because I have been competing quite a bit, and I kind of consider those to be in like the same thread, though a course teaches. At the very least, shooting competitions allows me to employ different techniques or practice different things on a timer and be able to get like feedback and all that kind of stuff. Review my footage later, figure out where it is that I need to like increase my efficiencies and stuff like that. So I'm on a pretty strict rotation and regimen with my firearms and my firearms training, and this gun just hasn't really popped up a lot here recently. I have shot it off and on over the years, not to say that I haven't shot this gun at all. It's just I've not been spending as much time with it to really be that bugged about the sights to be able to bump it up in my rotation for change. Now, how do I feel about Glock plastic sights? I'm not a fan. These really don't stand out. Like, yeah, sure, I've got the white dot front and this basket rear and all that kind of stuff, and they're at least white outline. They're not blacked out sights. But as far as picking up very quickly, if my presentation's good, they pretty much come together. It's more like recovery under recoil and stuff like that. I do feel like I have to strive to stay on these sights. Now, something that was previously mentioned, of course, is that this gun is still very flat cycling and all that kind of stuff. We have that long slide and long barrel and all that kind of stuff, which does allow me to very quickly reacquire these sights. If this gun was more snappy, these sights would be more of a hindrance to me at that point. I still can't wait to upgrade these to steel night sights though, because I don't really have a night fighting capability with this handgun at this point. Now, something I didn't mention, and there's actually two things I didn't mention in the previous video. One, we have this bull nose type setup, which originally came out in Generation 3 Glocks with the baby Glocks, the 26, the 27, so on and so forth, the subcompact Glocks. When they went to the long slide Glocks, those were the first large frame Glocks to have the bull nose cuts there, which this is supposed to help with reholstering and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is a standard feature on the Gen 5s. One of the issues with the early Gen 5s was that they did not also bullnose cut the frames, which was really annoying. Not that it impacted like function or anything along those lines. It was really poor fitment. Like it's not that hard to take a little bit of plastic off to make sure that the frame and the slide match. But Glock fixed that in later iterations of the Gen 5. Now, we also have this window here cut into the slide. This is something that was actually done away with on the Gen 5s. And the whole idea here is that you're supposed to kind of change the dynamic for the slide cycle when it comes to speed and it being flat and all that kind of stuff. One of the issues with this cutout is that it can cause malfunctions. One, we have a massive point of ingress for debris and all that kind of stuff. And then also I've seen some like videos of like brass getting caught up in there. I don't entirely know how you achieve that, but I guess it's happened. And it has induced malfunctions. To date, I've not had any malfunctions with this gun. The closest I've gotten to is like one time I think I rode actually in shooting for this video, I rode the magazine or the the slide catch and the slide didn't lock to the rear, but that happens so seldom with this handgun. This has been completely and utterly reliable, no issues, big fan of this. All right, let's talk about this trigger real quick. So I mentioned in the previous video that I am not a trigger snob, and I really am not a trigger snob by any means. Now, here recently, I've been shooting a lot of hammer-fired guns, and some hammer-fired guns with really good triggers in them. And coming onto this trigger was a little bit of an adjustment. So Glock claims that this is like I'm actually trying to remember now, like 5.5 pound, 4.5 pound trigger, something like that. And it's very stagey. Very stagey, a little gritty, with a little bit of tension, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a defined wall. And the trigger also resets pretty substantially far from the wall. So there's the reset, and there we go with that take up and all that kind of stuff. And this is roughly the wall. Yep, there it was. This is something, as I was training through a lot of like 2-shot engagements, trying to get back on the sights real rapid and all that kind of stuff, this is something that I actually found this trigger to be a little bit of a hindrance on. Now, keep in mind, my hits were still in A zone, but like my first round would be more or less dead center, and then my second round would kind of fly a little bit to the left or right. Still A zone, they just aren't stacked super neat. And keep in mind, guys, I'm a perfectionist, so I want my shot groups like really close together. It's a pursuit of mine, and it's something that I've been trying to like work with my dial and all that kind of stuff to be able to push having speed and not necessarily just have pretty groups. But I am a really big fan of pretty groups, and I do think this gun should be able to achieve that. We'll get into that more whenever it is that we talk about modifications later on. Now, the slide release, even though I don't run it, I do really appreciate the slide release. I'm still a big fan of overhand racking slides, and that's entirely because I train on so many different platforms, and the slide is in the same location. The slide release is not necessarily the same case. Now, keep in mind, guys, whenever it is that I'm evaluating slide releases, or handguns in general, what I look for is that your magazine release, your slide release, and if you have a safety, your safety are all accessible from your firing hand. And in my opinion, that's really important. So one of the things that I like about the Glock formula is that I can reach all of these things with my firing hand. In addition to that, with that little shoulder that they put onto the competition slide release, even though that's really not that big, it is quite helpful in being able to engage with the slide release. Now, a lot of times you got to keep an eye on Glock's finish because it seems that Glock does not do a good job of putting a finish on the slide release, and this is showing more wear by far than the slide is, but it's not showing as much wear as I've seen on like Gen 5 slide releases. So that's pretty cool. I do appreciate that. It seems like maybe this is a little better finished, or maybe it's just because I don't really use the slide release that often, is why that I don't really have an issue with that. So, big fan of the slide release. How about the grip? How do I still feel about the finger grooves and all that kind of stuff? Once again, I'm not bothered by the finger grooves. I do think that this could stand to have more texture. And the Gen 4 frames are more textured than the Gen 3, and I definitely prefer the Gen 4s to the Gen 3 texture. I do wish that this had a more aggressive texture, and a lot of it also comes down to I wish there was more texturing up here. I try to keep the lower part of my grip kind of loose so that I don't necessarily dip the muzzle and all that kind of stuff. I have a tendency to kink these bottom fingers whenever it is that I like tighten my whole hand. So I try to remember to keep these bottom fingers a little bit more loose, which means that I'm getting more grip, or more of my grip is required up here. And I really do wish that there was more texturing going up this high. I understand people who feel a need to Dremel and then texture these grips up a little bit more. Like I get it. It's not necessarily for me. I haven't considered, or I have considered, but I haven't pulled the trigger on doing that type of texturing job on this, and I'm still kind of on the fence as to whether or not I will in the future. Now, something that I've noticed here recently has been magazine releasing. I've noticed that this gun's a little sluggish in releasing the magazine, and I don't know if this is a matter of like the magazine itself, if maybe this one's like a little swelled up or something along those lines, but I actually had an issue on the range just the other day. Issue, mind you, just the other day. Now, as we can see in that little clip, I was going for my magazine, like my next source of feed, and I mean, now it's falling out pretty easily, but at that point on the range, the magazine did not really want to fall. I had to kind of get a little flick going on in there. Almost thought I was going to have to rip the magazine out to insert my next one. Now, that was a very cold day. That could have been the issue. There are any number of things that could have been. I have noticed that the release here lately, as I've been like doing dry fire practice with this gun and stuff like that, is sometimes a little sluggish. That is something I don't remember being an issue in the past, but it also might not have been something that I was looking for. Now, keep in mind, guys, I've actually been training with this gun, getting ready for an IDPA match coming up. My plan is to utilize the duty belt exemption, so I've been training with my duty belt more out on the range, and I don't have mag pouches on my duty belt. So a lot of that, in this case, like, yeah, okay, so the magazine doesn't like immediately drop free, but as long as it drops free before my next source of feed is ready, then everything's okay, right? Kind of. So as I'm already, because I don't keep mag pouches on my duty belt, I keep them instead in a pocket on my pants because I don't have enough space on my duty belt with all my other duty requirements. So with that being the case, as I'm trying to get those mags out of that pocket, I'm also seeing out of the corner of my eye, because I am going from workspace, that the magazine hasn't dropped yet. So now my brain's kind of divided on these two different tasks, and it makes it more difficult to perform either one of them. Whereas if it just dropped out and I got the next magazine in there, it wouldn't be nearly as big of an issue. Now, someone might say, well, it also helps if you put mag pouches on your gun belt. But when you have additional tasks that you have to perform, you have to make a decision between what's more important: being able to use a low probability option like a firearm, like a handgun, or preference my gear that I'm supposed to be using, that I'm supposed to have available so that I can do the tasks that I'm supposed to do. People who have tasks other than just shooting have to figure out that balance for themselves. And I can tell you with many years of experience that the decision I've made has worked out just fine. So the magazine release thing is something that I've been kind of keeping an eye on. I haven't noticed it with any of my other Glocks. I have noticed that it seems to be kind of like a popular Instagram thing right now to incorporate this like massive flick whenever it is that you're conducting a reload. I think that's a little unnecessary if you have magazines that actually drop free. And there's some things that you can do to improve that. You can put heavier base plates on them and stuff like that to help make sure that your magazine, works with gravity and falls out of the gun and all that kind of stuff. I was recently at a competition where a fella was doing this like unnecessarily drastic flick, and it was something that was actually kind of eating into his time a little bit. Now, he wound up shooting better than I did, so obviously this thing is working out for him, but it is like a little refinement that I noticed, that if he just appropriately like weighted his magazines, or just trusted that his magazines would fall out and read the gun in doing so. Don't blindly trust it. You still need to pay attention to what's going on, but if he just kind of did that, he'd be like slightly faster. Just something to keep in mind. Of course, you can say the same thing when it comes to overhand racking, but we've already discussed why it is that I do that. Everything's a conscious trade-off. He's made his, I've made mine. We've got to be happy with our decisions or change them for the better. All right, guys, that's my discussion of features. Why don't we go ahead and look at a little shooting footage before we get into the kind of recommendations portion of this. All right, so what are my recommendations when it comes to this handgun? Have they changed over the years? Would I recommend this for duty use? Yes. You could point out this being a problem potentially for duty use. However, whenever you see torture testing where somebody like throws these things in mud or sand or all that kind of stuff, like Military Arms Channel and their testing, they'll tell you right off the bat, that is worst case scenario type testing. I don't think for most, especially if you're talking about like law enforcement, I don't think for most people that's going to be, that this cutout is going to be that big of an issue. You start to talk about it in a military sense, maybe, but a fully enclosed holster will help out with that quite a bit. And I mean, once again, conscious trade-off. How worried are you about the gun getting like super caked up versus the performance type aspects that this gun brings along with it. Conscious trade-off. Everyone's got to make decisions. Would I recommend this for self-defense, home defense? No. And I was actually really surprised in the comment section at the number of people who stated that they do conceal carry this handgun. And they're like, oh, well, it's just all about like your body and all that kind of stuff. There's a couple of constants that I've noticed when it comes to concealed carry. This is kind of its own separate video, but we'll go ahead and like hit the wave tops of the subject right off the bat. Large and or heavy firearms, while they are great to shoot, can become uncomfortable carry options. And when a carry option becomes uncomfortable, you are less likely to carry it. That's why generally small handguns are considered to be ideal for concealed carry, because it's something that you will consistently carry. Now, I do try to carry the largest thing that I can, but I'm pretty dedicated, like I'm really good about making sure that I carry a firearm. But I've carried uncomfortable guns and have ultimately decided to stop carrying those guns because they are uncomfortable, and they were edging me towards the idea of like, oh man, you know what, maybe the clothing that I'm wearing is really light, that's just gonna really drag down my belt line. Why don't I just throw it in the truck or something like that? Or maybe I just won't carry. The whole point of concealed carrying is to conceal carry. And that kind of segues us into our next portion of this conversation. Larger and or heavy guns are more difficult to properly conceal without printing and all that kind of stuff. And the big thing about concealment is being concealed. It's kind of, this like flirts along the line with the discussion on like open carry and stuff like that. If you're not carrying a duty type rig, in a duty sense of mind where you're keeping up constant surveillance, you want to be as concealed as you can, because that type of constant surveillance is really difficult to maintain day in and day out when you're just trying to like grab a burger or something like that. Concealed carry is a very important, effectively concealing is a huge portion of being able to effectively employ your weapon in dynamic situations, as well as to be able to accommodate dynamic situations. Whole separate conversation, but that's kind of my point here. Anytime somebody tells me that they carry a big and or heavy option, I begin to question how effectively and how frequently they're actually carrying it. That's just the projection that I have in my mind. That I don't know these people. Maybe they're actually really good about it, but I do know people, and that's what makes me doubt it to begin with. So I would not recommend this for self-defense. That's a really long story to get to the point of I would not recommend this for self-defense, but for home defense, this has been a bedside gun option for me in the past. Throw a light on here, get night sights on it and all that kind of stuff. This gun would be perfectly acceptable for a home defense option, because when we're talking about home defense, we are not carrying this gun necessarily on our body. We have it on a bedside table, we have it in a safe, or whatever it is, whatever method it is that we're employing to be able to have this gun at hand should we need it in a home defense type situation. We can preference larger, heavier guns for that purpose because it's not weighing on the body. And of course, larger, heavier guns are easier to fight with to a certain point, depending on what it is that you're doing, of course. Okay, so that's home defense, self-defense. What about competition? Well, this gun was built for competition, so that's a pretty easy answer. Of course, yes, absolutely. You should totally use this for competition type purposes. If it's allowed, this is a difficult gun to get into competitions like IDPA, which are supposed to be more based around defensive type pistols. I'm utilizing my duty belt exemption in order to be able to get around that, because I do want to train with these larger guns, and I do want to generate some competition content for the channel with these larger guns, be it here or on the Merciless Facebook page, which you're interested in that, go ahead and check the link in the description. What about as like a woods gun or something along those lines? No, not so much. Not if you're talking about trying to use this against the predators of the four-legged variety. I do have a friend who's living in Alaska right now who has like some +P+ buffalo bore 9mm rounds for his 43X and his 19. But that's not something that if he knew he was walking out into the woods, he would carry. That's something more for like around town where he expects to perhaps be in some way dynamically involved with the varmint of the two-legged variety, and is concerned that perhaps something of the four-legged variety could show up. That's like just a weird thing. Like, I've never necessarily lived in that situation. I haven't lived in a place where you could potentially be walking down the street and run into a bear, but I could understand how that dynamic would become fluid if you did. This is not necessarily what I would recommend as a dedicated woods gun, though, if we're talking about either hunting and or defending yourself against the four-legged variety of predator or game, whatever. It doesn't really matter in this case. So not necessarily recommended. Okay, what are my uses for this handgun at this point? This is actually something that was kind of something I was still debating when I first got this gun. Do I race it out? Do I make it a dedicated tactical gun and all that kind of stuff? And what I think I've decided on, at least at this point, is that I'm more steered or more geared towards the practical, tactical aspect of this firearm. So things that I expect to upgrade about this, I expect to swap out these sights to night sights. I do think I'm going to do some trigger improvement on this. I've been kind of thinking something along the lines of like a maybe a ghost connector, 3.5 pound connector or something along those lines. Just something to clean this trigger pull up just a little bit, not necessarily thinking about like dropping in something crazy and all that kind of stuff. And if you're talking about getting into competition, you have to be careful about what modifications you make to this gun as to where you're going to land in different divisions. You have to be familiar with your individual groups, divisions, in order to be able to know how that's going to go. In addition to that, if you're going to use this for duty type purposes, not all drop-in triggers for Glocks are authorized for duty use. Concerns about like drop safety and all that kind of stuff. So that's something you have to look into as well. So I would clean this up a little bit. And I've considered that I would also add like a flared mag well and put some heavier base plates on these magazines at this point. Maybe add some rounds extension or something along those lines. I think making this into a more, I don't want to say bare bones, but the practical, tactical aspect of this. Make this a very effective fighting handgun, because to me, this is a fighter. Still up in the air on whether or not I'm going to add a light. I don't think it needs a light. And when I say that, like, yes, absolutely, if you're talking about like a fighting pistol, being able to identify a target in the dark is important. However, it's the added weight to the muzzle that I'm a little concerned about, getting into like negative recoil when we already have like this very flat cycling slide. I don't necessarily want to throw any more weight. So I'm still playing around with that idea overall. If you're somebody who's added a light to your long slide Glock, you should speak up in the comment section and tell me how it's impacted your recoil profile. Just for my own edification, if you would, please. Now, something that I've been trying to incorporate recently into newer videos are competitive offerings. Now, of course, this is the 34, the 9mm. There's also the Glock 35, which is the 40 Smith & Wesson. In my opinion, between 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson, it really doesn't matter. I don't care what you choose, because all handgun cartridges are inherently bad fight stoppers. That is a guiding principle on this channel. But if you were looking at other options on the market, sticking with the striker-fired realm of things, there's the P320 X5, whatever wonky designation, I'll roll on a picture, that SIG has. That has been very popular, especially when you're talking about a kind of like ready-to-go competition model and all that kind of stuff. If you were perhaps a little bit more traditional, the P30L would be an interesting polymer-framed hammer-fired option, which, then you can get your John Wick going on there, drop in an LEM trigger, throw a compensator on there and all that kind of stuff, and just LARP to your heart's desire. In addition to that, another kind of fringe offering that I think would be very competitive to this would be the CZ-P09. And you would also get higher capacity, though it is a larger overall gun. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular video. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.